I'd like to just start off with the elephant in the room. How freaking hot is it? So apologies for the hair on top of my head, but I literally cannot wear my hair down right now because it is so hot. So if you need to get up and walk around, maybe get a glass of water or a bottle, please do so. I will not be offended because it's freaking hot in here. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Shanna. I'm a product manager here at Classy. I actually work with our engagement team and our data team. And my passion to empower the world is really what has kept me at Classy and within this sector for the last 10 years. So I always like to introduce myself, but I think it's really important that you guys introduce yourselves as well. So your turn, in the sense that the person you're sitting next to fanning each other off, you'll continue to fan each other off, and I think it's important that you know who you're fanning off. So, if you could just start, introduce yourselves, what you do, and most importantly, why are you here? What's your passion? All right, so I think for the most part, everyone knows each other now, or by now. Well, some of us continue to talk. That's fine. Hey, what are you passionate about? Tell each other. All right, so the reason we started off that way is because in actually just that 3-sentence statement, the amount of data that you received is about 9 data points. And it's important to know that because simply conversations can actually provide you a lot of data. I think it's incredibly important to remember that data comes in so many different ways. It comes qualitatively and it comes quantitatively. We hear often that nonprofits or even just the general social sector will say, you know, we really don't have the resources to invest in our data, and we get it, you don't. But you have data at your fingertips, and I think that's a crucial piece of the puzzle. So, just in the way that you interacted with the people that are sitting next to you, you probably got 10 to 15 data points just from that person sitting next to you. I wanted to start off this talk with one of Classy's core values. And Scott and Pat and I didn't really coordinate beforehand, but they talked about learning in their opening keynote, and I thought that was great because it actually speaks to one of my slides here. Always be learning. This is one of Classy's core values. It actually is a sticky note on my desk. And I look at it obviously every day because I'm sitting there. But somebody really profound introduced me to what the concept of really what always be learning is. And that's actually Classy's resident data scientist, and he was sitting around here. His name's Dr. Ben Cipollini, and Dr. Ben is actually going to meet with us on stage for the Q&A. But what Ben did was actually teach me the power of data. So I understood from like a perspective of here's some numbers, some graphs, I can run a survey or two, but really empowering data to actually take you to the next level was something that I had no idea about. And today we're going to talk about some of those things. So, I mentioned that data is powerful. It's actually helped to shape a lot of the Classy product today. It's helped to shape so many decisions all over the world, and I'm sure a lot of your nonprofits are also witness to data being so powerful that it shapes direction. It's even powerful when you're sitting next to the person that you're fanning off. So, I would love, since this talk is on fundraising, I would love to have you guys connect with the person next to you. If you have a successful fundraising campaign, a campaign where you raised money, I'd love to have you tell each other about it. So you'll take 30 seconds apiece and talk about a successful fundraising campaign, what it looked like for you. All right, so the reason why I asked you to tell each other a fundraising success story is because we at Classy get the question, how do you make a fundraiser successful? How do you make a fundraising campaign successful? And oftentimes, We have this very simple answer, it's direct, but people don't really believe us. So I was like, that's what I'm going to start this talk out with. So what's also interesting about this key takeaway is that this isn't rooted in quantitative data. This is not specific data points that actually pointed me in this direction. That is very important to know, that all data is not rooted in numbers and graphs and those sorts of things. So fundraising success includes strategy, execution, and flexibility. So let's go into all three of those. But first, anybody talk about strategy at all when they started the conversation around their campaign? Great, no one. Makes me feel great. Okay, over there. Oh, there you go. Okay, so what is a strategy? Strategy aligns your team. It identifies a plan, and it's rooted in data. And I think that's extremely important. Your strategy is your roadmap. It is actually what steers your team forward. And strategy is crucial to a fundraising campaign's success. Execution. Execution typically means like we're doing something. We're taking our strategy to the next level. But actually what execution is the root. Accountability is the root of execution. If you are not keeping people accountable for your fundraising campaign's success, then there's a good chance that things might go a little haywire. Finally, the last thing, flexibility. Sorry, I keep looking at these slides. I'm like, am I on the same right slide as everyone else? So, flexibility. So, that is important because things happen. In fact, what I typically like to say, shit happens. In that case, it's okay to pivot. And I think that's something that people tend to forget about when they're talking about their fundraising strategy. So much so that typically campaigns pivot mid-campaign. Something happens, something's not working. And for us at Classy, we've seen some of the greatest things happen when organizations actually decide to pivot in order to capitalize on their fundraising. So, next exercise for you all, because I don't want to talk as much because it's too hot. Right now, I think it would be a good time to talk about a failed fundraising campaign. And you can guess we're going to go into what a failed fundraising campaign looks like. Go ahead. We're getting a little vulnerable, so it's okay. All right, so now that everyone is familiar that failure is okay because we've all talked about it, let's talk about it from the data side of things. Now this next key takeaway is rooted in some data points, in some quantitative data points. So, if you build it, they will come, is the worst statement we have ever heard at Classy, because this does not work. You cannot simply throw up a campaign, put it on the internet, and expect all these fundraisers and donors to do what they're supposed to do. It just simply doesn't work. So, some of us have a hard time understanding how to actually, like, what does that mean? How did you find that out? And after a ton of just really diving into different data points, we realized we're talking about an activation rate. So, an activation rate is how many of your fundraisers have raised at least $1? This is a huge, huge point to make sure that you are continually tracking during a fundraising campaign, specifically if you have peer-to-peer fundraisers. An activation rate on Classy typically looks about 60%. 60% of fundraisers raise at least $1. That means that 40% don't. So we tried to understand why this was happening. We did a ton of research, and what we came upon is engagement. There was a lack of engagement on our platform that didn't allow an organization to communicate or properly communicate to a fundraiser. So we built it. And we have seen dramatic changes to the way that people communicate with each other via email on the platform. So we created auto tracks, created a couple different ways that people can actually communicate with their fundraisers. But this was crucial. Typically we see about 2 emails go out per fundraiser, and the feedback that we have gotten is tremendous. There's a couple of organizations that do a phenomenal job of fundraiser engagement. They are here today. Team Rubicon, Barbells for Boobs, a few of our favorite partners, even though all of our partners are our favorite. We talk about them because their strategy is executed and it's defined with engagement. If you see them around, ask them about it. They love to talk about their fundraiser engagement. Here we go. We got 2 of these little sessions left. So now that we've talked about fundraisers a little bit, it'd be good to describe your fundraisers to each other. What do they look like? Well, not really what do they look like, but what's the makeup of your fundraisers? Go ahead. All right. How many of you struggled with defining who your fundraisers are? I saw a few people roll their eyes in the beginning like, yeah, I kind of know what our fundraisers are. Or simply they just didn't know what their fundraisers were. Is there anybody who's willing to raise their hand and say, I really don't know, or we're trying to figure it out? Awesome. Some hands down here, which is fine. But we're going to talk a little bit about fundraiser and fundraiser value. So this is one of my favorite quotes. It actually came from one of our account managers. Date your donors and marry your fundraisers. This is important because of the relationship that you tend to make with the fundraiser rather than a donor, and where your time and money should be spent. There's a direct correlation between donation and fundraiser churn. Churn simply means who is not signing up again. Fundraisers bring you donors. So obviously there would be a direct correlation. If a fundraiser is not coming year after year, your donor is not coming year after year. Because what we've found is people donate to people. So it's been interesting. You all have asked each other 3 questions. You probably know more about the people sitting next to you than you do about your actual donors, which is kind of crazy. Your fundraisers. Shoot, it's a little hot in here. About your fundraisers. So, oftentimes we'll look at how many custom questions that you may be asked when a fundraiser signs up, and what do those custom questions look like. So on Classy, we typically see about 2 custom questions asked to a fundraiser, but the most common one is t-shirt size. That actually doesn't tell you a lot in most cases. So one of the things that I started to actually look at was what does it mean to ask a fundraiser the value that they get out of fundraising for your organization? Can you ask that question? And the answer is yes. In fact, your fundraisers want to tell you, they just don't get the opportunity to. So if you are not asking them why you are fundraising for us, why you like to be or how you like to be communicated to, and what motivates you, you are not understanding your fundraiser. You can then tailor communication. Maybe one likes to be communicated via email and another likes to be communicated through Facebook Messenger. You may find out things like one person's fundraising for the impact and another person is fundraising for the incentive. If you know those things, you can communicate and actually directly communicate to that fundraiser on why it's so important that they're fundraising for you. Gonna do a little plug. I got a talk tomorrow as well, and it actually dives into an experiments that we ran with Build On, which is one of our partners. And we created 3 experiments, and we actually wanted to see how well Build On knew their fundraisers. And without giving it too much away, they learned a lot. And so tomorrow we're going to dive into actually what those specific experiments were that we ran while doing that actual fundraising campaign. Fundraiser churn. So I talked about a little bit about fundraiser churn and donor churn, but do you know your fundraiser churn? Do you know the rate of your fundraiser churn? And most people can say no. In fact, I would say probably 75% of this room couldn't answer that question appropriately. Interestingly enough, on the Classy platform, about 75% fundraisers churn. which is pretty astonishing. We're desperately trying to figure this out. Why don't fundraisers come back often? So we're still digging into data because we're trying to learn, but this is a big thing. There's some great organizations who have great activation rates. They have great fundraiser, their fundraiser churn isn't as high. And so we can really see and make the comparison with activation rates and fundraiser churn. Basically, you're looking, do your fundraisers come back? That's the question you should be asking. So one of my most favorite things, and it's hot, so why not talk about hot leads? How many donors who donated to a fundraiser donate again outside of the campaign? This, to me, was shocking. These are donors who came in through a fundraiser, a peer-to-peer fundraiser, an individual. They donated to me. They are often communicated differently than a regular donor who may have came through a donate button. This is surprising because when we actually did a survey, a smaller survey, but we found that often the answer to this question stemmed and was rooted in fundraisers' donors are not my donors. So they are communicated with differently. That is wrong. Those donors are your donors. You can communicate with them just as much as you communicate with the others. In fact, it would be a huge pool to pull from if you actually tried to get them to become, excuse me, a recurring donor. Can I take a drink? Excuse me. So with that being said, the fourth key takeaway, the value of a recurring donation. Recurring donation campaigns are starting to become a little bit more popular on our site. In fact, we're starting to see numbers rise, rates rise. What we found in the beginning is that typically people like to donate month to month. We're now starting to see things that they like to do it weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. So we're starting to really look into how actually to help with those individual recurring donors. So what we're talking about right now is really the lifetime value of a donor. In a lot of cases, people don't understand really what their lifetime value actually is, what that donor's lifetime value. What we found is that a recurring donor has a much more significant, in fact, 3 times higher lifetime value than a single donor. So that means that single donors typically donate more, recurring donors donate less, but on average about 8 times. So they'll continue that donation month. Typically recurring donors are coming from your desktop. Hint, hint, you want a recurring donation campaign, maybe put that during the week, during business hours, and see a little bit of a difference. So we have talked about a bunch of stuff. So many different things that I probably overloaded you. But to recap, on Classy, we actually see that peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns do the best right now. That's our bread and butter, so it would make sense. But we do see that peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns really do well on our site. We also see from an engagement perspective, emails work best. So we looked at things like comments on a fundraising page, different ways that people actually wanted to be communicated with, and it came down to email. Campaign pace, I'm sure you're all familiar with. Everyone's going to fundraise those last 2 weeks in order to hit that fundraising goal. It's true, it's proven in the data. That is how it happens. Classy mode. So if you're not a Classy client, what does this mean? It actually means fee on top. What we found through a survey is that a lot of our organizations kind of had fear in asking their donors to add the transaction fee on top of their donation. And this proves that it works and it's not that big of a deal. So you can ask your donors to add that transaction fee on top. Whether you're with Classy or not, that is something that you can do. Fundraiser. The average raised on the Classy site, on the platform, is about $540. That really goes across industry-wide. The reason this is important and the reason I hit on this is a benchmark, not your goal. If your organization is smaller, starting out, you may see lower or you may see higher. this is a benchmark for you to utilize when you're strategizing about your campaign. And finally, donors per fundraiser. We see about 8. So that's 8 opportunities that you probably are miscommunicating with about somebody returning to you and donating again, understanding the impact of your organization, or even just becoming a supporter of what you do. So we started this talk talking about learning. And learning is the most significant thing, like I mentioned. It's kept me where I am in this sector. And data has allowed me to learn every single day. So I hope today you were able to learn at least a few things. Thank you. We're going to do a Q&A, and I'm going to have Ben come up, just in case I can't answer any of the real good data questions. This is Dr. Ben. So a few things. One, some people, this is Ben. Some people actually got a note card. If we don't answer your question, and if you have a specific question, write your email on it. Give it to me after, I'll answer it. We want to make sure that data is something that you're familiar with, you feel comfortable with. If you don't want to ask the question, write it down, put your email there, and we'll respond. Are there any questions? Yes. Oh.
Hi, I was wondering if you have any information around social media engagement in these campaigns.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we're collecting it for sure, but nothing at the fingertips. Social media is particularly challenging because if you don't record that information right away, for example, from Twitter, there's not a big history you can go back and get to. So that's in the process, but not quite there yet.
We're always learning. Always learning. Yeah.
What's the ratio of monthly recurring givers to just one-time donors when you're using the Classy site?
Yeah, I guess I can give that one. Sure. It's very so the number of donations per month. Yeah, I would say it's like 95%-ish one-time donors. Yeah. Yeah. As you go up, if you accumulate over the entire year, because those recurring donors are giving over and over, it turns out to be about 80-20. 80-20. But yeah, for a single month, it's pretty low.
Yeah, and it's important to know this is kind of a newer concept online. Offline, this was a very traditional way of fundraising, you giving monthly, but typically the first acceptance was offline. So moving people online kind of feels a little bit uncomfortable. Also, if they are currently recurring donor, to ask them to get onto a new system can sometimes be difficult. But yeah, it's definitely something that we're starting to see as far as trending upwards.
Right, and just that varies widely by organization and how much they target it. So we had a Classy 100, the top growing nonprofits on Classy, and quite a few of them had strategically targeted recurring donors and saw big differences there. So yeah, it's very contextual, I think.
Yeah, there she is.
Hi, hi. I was just wondering if you had any data on how many recurring donors update their information through the website themselves based on the emails you guys send, or like when the company or organization has to log in and update their information. Does that make sense?
I think so. So it's like if a recurring donor needs to update their information, how often, like who does that? Does the org
Yeah, whether
do
they do it themselves or whether they call me.
I don't have any information on that offhand, okay. But my intuition is that most people aren't updating their information very often at all.
Not updating it at all?
I mean, of course people are, some people are, but mostly people kind of set it and forget it from what I can see. Part of my thinking for that is because a lot of the recurring donor churn that we see is due to credit cards expiring and things of that nature. So unintentional churn, right? They're just not paying attention necessarily. Yeah.
So does Classy have or is in development any native tools that will give better back attribution? So somebody comes to my website and makes a donation because they clicked on a Google search ad versus if they clicked on an email link. That's information that's really valuable to me. Is there anything native to Classy that is coming that will help me with that?
So kind of like marketing source code tracking basically on the back end?
Right, so we're working with Salesforce and they have tools in place, but it would be great to have it built into the platform.
Yeah, it's actually one of the great things that we've learned over the last really 6 months, how crucial that is to an organization. So we're currently researching exactly how that would play a role in the Classy platform. So it's something that we foresee doing, but currently right now it's actually not something that pulls through.
Okay.
Yeah.
This might be more of a strategy question, but for the organizations that you've seen that have really low fundraiser churn, do you know of the things that they're doing to keep fundraisers around?
Yeah, it is somewhat of a strategy question, and it kind of depends on the fundraiser themselves. So in some cases, in fact, I would say a lot of cases, communicating your story to that fundraiser, making that personal connection to that fundraiser has actually dramatically increased the reason of why they are fundraising for you. So communication on impact, communication on story, in some ways incentives. If you're sending someone across the world, sometimes that helps them to come back. But oftentimes, it's very personal. It's a very personal thing. So it really depends on the fundraiser that you're actually looking to continue to fundraise with you. But yeah, a lot of times it's about impact and story.
You had a statistic up there, 8 donors per fundraiser. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so on average, which basically means typical, because you have anywhere from people who donate two donors, all the way to like 25, 50 donors. So on average, we see about 8 donations come through to that specific donation page. It's reflected on the goal. So if your goal is a little bit higher, typically you're going to have more donors and those sorts of things. But it's about 8 new donors to that fundraising page. Do you have anything to add to that? A fundraiser, great distinction, and I'm sorry that I missed on this one. A fundraiser, in the way that we're speaking, is a personal fundraiser. Somebody who is fundraising for your organization associated to a campaign, a peer-to-peer campaign. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
This is more like looking at Classy within your guys' team, like in collaboration from, say, what Ben wants to capture versus what product and marketing wants to see. Like, is that just a constant collaboration? And then obviously they would want to consult with you to be able to protect data quality and data integrity, right? Like how you're capturing it, what you're capturing. Is that just constant?
So I'll go first and then you go. So Ben and I work really closely together. And I think that's one of the ways that really is going to help our platform grow in a sophisticated way with our data, is to really make sure that product and the data team is actually working together, moving things forward. But I would actually love to hear from your perspective.
Yeah. I would say that the happy side is that my team's on the product team, and so we interact all the time for sure. With that said, it's a relatively new team. Classy's been around for a little while, so most of what we're doing right now is digging through the old data, figuring out what's there, what it means, and then doing this kind of interactive feedback to improve the data collection, to find points where we could be collecting data and we're just missing out. So that's kind of the future. Right now, it's really understanding through what we have already.
Yeah. Oh, then I promise. Okay.
When you were talking about some of those numbers, like number of donors per fundraiser, et cetera, do you have those broken out by cities versus more rural areas? Do people in more rural areas have fewer donors? Do people do they get more donors somehow? It's coming from a rural area. I'm always wondering if there's something that we could be doing better or differently given our lower population density.
Yeah. That's a phenomenal question. We don't know, but Ben might.
No, of course, I don't know yet. I mean, we're still trying to get the social media and kind of network, the size of your network type of things, as well as the location, the actual physical location. So not yet, but it's definitely a direction that we're going.
It was interesting with that Build On campaign I was talking about. We did look at which states donated most to that campaign and those sorts of things. It was no surprise. You're looking at California, New York, and those sorts of things. So we've looked at it from a state by state, but not rural versus a heavily populated area, which is actually would be a really cool thing to look at. So if I do.
Right, and I mean, one of the first things we'll look at for charities is how much fundraising happens within the state that they're from versus out of state, just to get an assessment of how much locality matters to what they're doing and the potential for going outside that to find new donors.
Yes. Yeah.
I was just wondering, for monthly recurring donors, do you have any data on, for monthly recurring donors, did you have any data on?
It's fine, it doesn't work here in front of the speaker. I'll repeat it though. Go ahead.
After year one, do you have any data on how many of them will upgrade to a larger donation monthly-wise, like year after year?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question that we're actually really looking into now. So because we know that on average it's about 8 months that that they're there, we are trying to really figure out how to address a recurring donor to bump them $5 or those sorts of things. In some cases, there's been some organizations who have done it really successfully, and it simply comes back to transparency. So if you are more transparent, they often feel like they can give more because they understand you more. And we actually really hit on that when we were trying to understand an impact analysis. And so what we found is there was a correlation between your transparency in a donor and what they were willing to give to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned something earlier about 2 weeks for a campaign. What did you mean by that? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so at campaign pace, you often see donations rise at the end of the 2 weeks because normally that's when your fundraisers are trying to reach their goal. So they typically, and it actually happens across all campaigns, not just peer-to-peer. You'll see ticket sales, even the collaborative. The last 2 weeks, you'll see this spike. In either donations, ticket sales, or those sorts of things. People just typically like to wait until the end.
So
I guess
I'm sorry, just to
pressure.
follow. So like if you have a campaign and you have it for a month, you're going to say the last 2 weeks are the prime time where you're going to see more, or do you say you should really only have a campaign for 2 weeks?
So no, you want to run your campaign for an extended amount of time. And in fact, you can actually see with fundraisers, they'll create the fundraising page at the very beginning, but towards the end, you'll actually see when the donations or when they're actually hitting their goal. Do you have any specific data points on that? Ben and I were actually just talking about that not too long ago. So it's not that you should shrink your campaign length. It's more so that you're going to see a rise in donations just at that time period because it's kind of human nature to wait till the last minute.
Right,
So.
and just to say...
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And just to say that that's all kind of like general, right? You'll definitely see fundraisers who are killing it early and things like that. So yeah, if you shorten your campaign length, you're going to...
Shorten the amount of time.
Right, shorten the amount of time those killers are going to be able to kill.
Yeah. So we have time for one more question. Again, if you have those note cards, please give them, put your name on them. I promise to email you tonight. So, yeah.
Thanks. So you might have already said, but I was wondering how many fundraisers do you typically have on average per organization? And if you have any recommendations for how to increase fundraisers, because we've tried to do this before, we've tried to do peer-to-peer, and none of our donors want to do it. They don't want to be fundraisers. Like we've had maybe 2, and they get frustrated and they don't ever want to do it again.
That's a phenomenal question. So I don't know if you have that number, but I would say it's dependent. Oftentimes you will see certain cause sectors do real well on peer-to-peer fundraising. And it's kind of hard because the rest of the cause sectors, what are they supposed to do kind of thing. We've seen some really cool things as far as how to make someone convinced that they need to be your fundraiser. And so there's a lot. I go back to the transparency conversation. when you are more transparent, somebody believes in you more. So if you're willing to say, like, we need X, Y, and Z, we need your help, somebody may be more willing to help you. Older, more established organizations, it's really interesting because as they move online, they've kind of struggled with this. How do we get these donors to become fundraisers? And it's a question that I think we're still trying to understand. We see that, typically they're kind of younger, but we do see really successful, a little bit older people, in the nicest way possible, do really, really well. In fact, they're some of our largest fundraisers. So I would kind of wrap that into a bow to say it depends on what your cause is and how you're communicating the transparency and the impact of your organization. How can they feel bought into what you do? How do they represent you in that way? So that is all that we have time for. Ben does have office hours today if you'd love to pick Ben's brain, actually today and tomorrow. But again, just thank you all for the questions. I hope this was beneficial. And we'll stick around for a little bit towards the back. If you want to hand in those note cards, definitely can, or use them to take notes at another session. Thank you.